Arundhati, did one of the speakers get disconnected or something? Just check once, please.
No, she's coming back. Right. Namaskar and a very warm welcome to our speakers and viewers on the behalf of the Global Tiger Forum. Under the aegis of the Jeff 7 Small Wildcat Project that looks into strengthening wildcat landscapes through a focus on small wildcat and leopard conservation, we are commemorating the International Clouded Leopard Day today. The clouded leopard, one of the priority small wildcat species of India, is an elusive species whose natural history and biology still needs extensive on-ground studies. Our webinar today focuses on looking at the global and national conservation status of the species and generate awareness on this small wildcat, which is a larger cat among the remaining small wildcat. So without further ado, I now invite Dr. Rajesh Gopal, Secretary General of the Global Tiger Forum. A small introduction on Dr. Gopal. Dr. Gopal usually needs no introduction to the common populace. However, for the uninitiated, Dr. Rajesh and big cats, especially the Bengal tiger, are synonymous with each other. His exemplary work in the field of conservation spans over 3 decades, and he continues to be a guiding light for various species and landscape conservation strategy development initiatives. His efforts to bring in science into field management have brought a paradigm shift in pellet conservation, which strengthened exclusive and intensive conservation agendas. I now invite Sir to kindly give the keynote address on small wildcats being sentinels of climate change. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Arundhati. I compliment you and your team and your colleagues out here in the Global Tiger Forum and all others with whom we have collaborated for organizing this very timely interaction. So keep it up. Now, I'll be brief because we have to manage the time. And I also thank all the participants who are with us today virtually. So good, and it's encouraging to see people so passionate about this important cause. Now, what are small cats? Small cats, as the name implies, they are smaller in size. The limbs are small. They are felids. So we have 16 species of felids, wild felids. Mind you, these small cats do not connote to our domestic cats. Though domestic cats are there, but what we mean in the present context of this webinar, small cats pertain to the wild small cats. Now, they have all those attributes which go with felids, which characterize felidae, and there are adaptations. Most of us may be aware of those adaptations to successfully predate in nature and to survive. So the nature has endowed them with a lot of adaptations in the form of good night vision, stealth walking, retractile or semi-retractile claws, and the kind of small gestation of 90 to 100 days, whether it is tiger, the big cat, or a small cat. Quite a number of adaptations are there. That's why they are successful in nature. Now, what is the difference between a big cat and a small cat? Big cat can roar, small cat can purr. Because of the hyoid apparatus which you have here, it is completely ossified in small cats. Anyway, we have 11 of them with us in the wild still, and most of them have an endangered status. So Arundhati would be articulating more on those species, like we have the cloud, starting from the clouded leopard, then the desert cat, jungle cat, leopard cat, so on and so forth. So many of them are there. Some of them are exclusively found in higher reaches. What is important to consider here is they are sentinel species. Now, what do I mean by that? It's something akin to your umbrella species. Like umbrella in the sense, ecological umbrella. Like that, sentinel means they, by virtue of their presence at the apex of the ecological pyramid, whether it's big or small, they are terminal predators in the ecological food web. So the trophic levels culminate there, and you need some kind of a smaller fauna So they, since they appropriate smaller fauna, they are known as mesopredators also. So it's good, it's very important to bring the focus on these smaller cats because they, just like a zoom lens, they because the limbs are small, they'll thrive and the relative abundance would be good if the area locality factors in the context of ecology being remaining less disturbed is there. The situation prevails if, like that, then they are there. So that is not the situation usually because most of them thrive near human settlements. Some of them are forest dwellers, but quite a few of them they venture out and they do thrive because of the kind of cultivation and the land use agro-pastoral continuum which we have. So, irrespective of any country, the cultivation happens. You have rodents, and that there's an important diet complement for these small cats. So you have problems relating to their food, their habitat, and then the denning sites and all that get flooded, and so many issues are there. If small cats are intact and the relative abundance is good, the adaptation, not the mitigation, adaptation to ward off the ill effects of climate change, you can rest assured is happening to some extent. Because as I said, if you have those ecological parameters in place, then the small cats are thriving. So if they are thriving, it's symbolic of the well-being of the ecosystem. Well, more on that, you all would be articulating, deliberating, and I know. Thank you once again. Thank Arundhati and hand over the floor to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving the keynote address and apprising the audience on the different small wildcat species. We now move on to the first talk for today, which is on the global status of the clouded leopard. And we have for that, just a second, for the talk, Mr. Monish Kapoor. Mr. Monish Kapoor is the head of program and partnerships at the Global Tiger Forum. He's a gold medalist, having done his master's in biodiversity and conservation, and he's also an alumna of the prestigious National Parks Institute International Leadership Seminar from the University of California. He leads several programs within the Global Tiger Forum on regional capacity building, landscape level planning, community stewardship, green financing, and evolving innovative alliances that strengthen and advocate for sustainable development and green growth. He will speak to us today more on the global status of clouded leopard and conservation strategies. Due to a last-minute exigency, he's unable to join live, but he has been kind enough to record the talk and share it with us. So I will just play it on for you.
The species itself serves as an evolutionary link between the Pantherinae and the Feline subfamily of Felidae. So within Pantherinae, there are two major genus. One, of course, is Panthera, where you have the tiger, lion, leopard, and the other one is the Neophelis, which is the clouded leopard. So as you can see, it serves as that link, and evolutionary also it has served uh, as an important link between these two genuses. They are mostly arboreal and survive in very dense thickets of forests. Very few reports have come where they are also found in some of the open areas, but mostly in very dense, thick forests and arboreal in nature. They weigh, of course, they are just like other small cats. Their weight is not much when you compare it to other big cats, but still it is relatively heavier with 11 to 25 kgs, and the females, of course, being a bit lighter. One interesting characteristic in these species is, of course, that they have the largest canines across all the cat species when you uh, relate it to its body size. So the canine is pretty much has the largest proportion among all the cat species across the globe. And they can't roar, they purr because they have an ossified hyoid apparatus, and they are excellent climbers. So they climb trees, and while coming down, there have been a lot of observations made where they have actually come head down. So the grip and their adaptation for gripping such trunks and branches is really immense. They are perhaps one of the best climbers, and among the cat species, their hind limbs are slightly more elongated than the front one, which also gives them that extra maneuvering potential to navigate such arboreal habitats in dense areas. Then, if you see their prey also, it is both arboreal and ground dwelling in nature. And some of their prey is actually larger than them in some at least some species are, definitely, because they have the ability to really expand them out about 100 degrees or so. So this really gives them uh, a very valuable adaptation to survive and to predate in such difficult habitats. And the peak activity has been noticed mostly to be crepuscular or nocturnal at large. And within Neophelis, among all the species of Neophelis, there were three species. One of them is possibly extinct now. I'll come to that slide later. But the ones which are present is, of course, the clouded leopard, the mainland clouded leopard, and the Sunda clouded leopard. I'll talk about their distribution in the next slide. And the global status, just like many other wildlife species, is decreasing. The mainland clouded leopard is estimated to be less than 6,000 individuals, and the Sunda clouded leopard close to 5,000 or less individuals. The Formosan clouded leopard was the third one, which is possibly extinct, was found in parts of Taiwan, and possibly some records were there in 1970s, 80s, but there has been no recent records, so it's possibly extinct. It is resident to South Asia and some Southeast Asian habitats, the Eastern Himalayas and the tropical rainforest habitats, and possibly also present in Vietnam, but there is no recent record from there. And the IUCN assessments done show that it is extinct in Taiwan, the Hainan province of China, and parts of Singapore. This is the current geographic range. As you can see, it is diminished, much like other cat species. It has remained in the Eastern Himalayas and Southeast Asia, but within the larger landscape, you can see that the habitat has really shrunk a lot. And the other species, the Sunda clouded leopard, found only in Indonesia, the Borneo forests and parts of Sabah in Malaysia, and within that also is currently very, very restricted in its distribution. In popular culture, clouded leopard has been seen in postage stamps. It is very, very, if you do a literature review or just type clouded leopard online, you find so much of work has happened. There are so many awareness campaigns. There are databases, websites on this species. Uh, Even though much less than what we see on tigers and snow leopards or leopards, but definitely this species being another iconic and charismatic one really has been part of folklore, part of culture. As you can see, so many postage stamps, not only in the clouded leopard range countries, but also beyond that. And this is another famous painting by Rama Samaravira from Sri Lanka, which is present in the US, and it is from the 1970s. This shows that the, the species has been talked about, and there has been attempts to raise awareness since several decades. But it is now in the current uh, Anthropocene where we are really trying to focus on species which we call the lesser known species across the globe, and try to do some collective effort for their conservation, just like we have done for other big cats. Major threats, I talked about habitat fragmentation and degradation. There are plantations, there are a lot of land use changes happening in these pristine habitats, which threaten the survival of these really niche adapted species. They, unlike tigers and other species, they adapt to, clouded leopards adapt to very specific habitat requirements. So this becomes crucial that even if it's a protected area, within the protected area itself, there are specific zone plans, there are specific uh, habitat characteristics which need to be managed and preserved to ensure the survival of species like the clouded leopard. The concept of critical wildlife habitat really serves well for species like the clouded leopard and other wildcats. Poaching and illegal trafficking has been on the rise. There have been reports of seizures of clouded leopard pelts, as well as uh, clouded leopard pet trade has been on the rise, especially of the illegal nature. And prey depletion of, as you can see, when I talked about the prey ranges from arboreal species to ground dwelling uh, ungulates. It is important that the entire biodiversity niche is conserved as such, because even one extinction of any prey species, or if anything goes bad in that entire food circle, it really percolates across different levels in the trophic chain. Then loss of functional connectivity, even though these species do not have very high or very vast home ranges like you would see in cases of tigers, but it is important that niche habitats also are functionally connected to each other. So there are portions of protected area, if they have become fragmented or not connected, or have kind of become segregated, it kind of serves as a death knell for species like the clouded leopard. Now, coming to the envisioned paradigm shift, how we can conserve them, the required perception has to move beyond moral and cultural science. It has to be a perception where these mascots, where these species become the mascots of livelihood and sustainable development. There have been so many studies across the globe which have showed that 1 rupee invested in a tiger or a wildlife landscape gives back so much to the economy, whether it is food security, water security, climate security. With little investment, we actually get more economic gains for the larger future than actual mainstream economy in some cases. It's also an indicator of SDG goals. Most of the countries are signatory to the CBD, which also is aligned to the SDG. So it's significant that these species, which serve as indicators and for the well-being of their respective ecosystems, are conserved and managed in the wild. Then the wildlife investments, the innovative green business models, which of course we have seen that it is on the rise. We have seen examples of rhino bonds in Africa. India is also on the verge of working towards a tiger bond. There have been conservation instruments like the Bhutan for Life, the Bhutan Trust Fund, which kind of ensures resource pooling. But we also need to go beyond the public funding, public sector funding. So the government funding, of course, remains crucial for any conservation actions, but beyond that, the private sector, the citizens at large, how they can contribute and invest towards conservation is going to be crucial. And this is where we need the best economic minds to really help the conservation fraternity to secure these many resources, because there's a severe resource crunch in the entire conservation sector, which also impedes sustainable development across all the countries. And they are, of course, important that there is existing research, but it's important to tie all of that. And we know that, of course, but we need cutting edge research where we are clearly able to link conservation of species like clouded leopards to climate change adaptations, to securing ecosystem services and preventing future pandemics, because forests also serve as green buffers to prevent pandemics like the COVID, in which almost the entire world was uh, uh, under a lockdown, and nobody would want such things to be repeated. So it's important that we go back to the basics. Conservation of environment, as I said earlier, is not only a moral issue anymore. It has to be part of the development process, and the entire survival of human race is dependent on the survival of these natural ecosystems. So what should we do? So if we look at a typical small cat landscape or a clouded leopard landscape, we can divide it into protected areas, which of course have a management regime on the ground. They are protected by the legislation, and of course some non-protected parcels may also have. There may be community lands which are well protected, especially in the northeastern portions, even in southeast. There are a lot of private forests and lands which serve as refuge for such small wildcat species. So within the protected area, we have a typical managerial portfolio of protection, interpretation, surveillance, monitoring, ensuring regular capacity building, because these are species where there's not much awareness and sensitization of staff. So we should ensure that the staff is well versed with the kind of habitat requirements and monitoring protocols required for such species specifically. Then another major aspect, I think one of my colleagues is going to speak later today, is how ex situ conservation can also help in the long run to have uh, populations in these conservation breeding programs, which may of course be rewilded in the future. There have been ex situ conservation breeding programs for clouded leopards, but not much success has been met, and partly because not much has been tried also. But of course, CZA remains committed to the cause, and I'm sure this would serve as an important tool in the species recovery program for the clouded leopards. Then active management, rewilding facilities required for such species is going to be important. Then, of course, coming to the non-protected area land parcels, where the people's agenda is going to be crucial. How we ensure livelihood sustenance vis-a-vis conservation of these species. So whether it is ecotourism, sustainable livelihood generation, conserving important wetlands for other species, conserving niche habitats through community stewardship, and then having human wildlife control units on the ground, rapid response teams, not particularly maybe for the clouded leopard, but wildlife at large. Because what happens if there are other species like elephants or tigers which come into conflict, and if there is retaliatory killing or targeted killing due to that, if there is, so it could happen to any species which may not be in direct conflict in a given landscape. But since we are at a point where our protected areas have almost become islands of sorts, it is important that the human wildlife conflict is addressed for all the species, which in turn can secure species like the smaller wildcats also. In fact, in the northeastern portion of our country, we have also seen cases where species like jungle cats actually come into conflict. They attack the poultry, and then there are cases of retaliatory targeted hunting. But there's a lot of awareness now. There's a social change happening where hunting is not the way of life for many now. So it is actually an opportune moment to work on such species and conserve them. So if you look at a typical clouded leopards landscape, what we really need as a strategy, we need the people's agenda, where we can talk about if there is a particular commodity or a resource that is present in that given area, how well we can sustainably source it, market it, brand it in a way where clouded leopard becomes the face and then has an export value, do some value addition on it, then precision skilling for local workforce to really enhance their capacity for certain produce on the ground, then human wildlife conflict mitigation. I've already talked at large, and special focus on youth and women, self-help groups. Then what we also need to prioritize is to prioritize community stewardship. So not only voluntary stewardship, but actually have models on the ground in which community is incentivized for conserving habitats of such uh, significantly uh, important species like the clouded leopards. Then, of course, sports, recreational events. In the ongoing project, we were successfully able to organize a football tournament in Arunachal Pradesh. And many would have a question, okay, what does the football tournament has to do with a small wildcat conservation? So it's an important case study where each each village team was given a wildcat as a mascot, and all the students and the teenagers who took part in that actually pledged that they would not hunt these species at all, and they would also create awareness around their villages that these species are not hunted or targeted, as well as uh, talk about the conservation portfolio in the larger community. So it is important that local people become the champions for this cause of protecting clouded leopards. There could be some private sector support. We have seen that in Project Cheetah. We have seen that in Project Rhino also, where corporate backing has been given to a certain species, which supports a lot of complementary action. So it's a win-win situation where the corporate gains in terms of branding of certain species which they are protecting, and the good environmental practices that they are implementing on the ground, but also the species benefits due to complementary support. Then, of course, species and habitat conservation protection becomes paramount. All these protected areas have to be absolutely managed effectively, managed well. The protection normative should be in place, and they should be further supported, as I mentioned earlier, with community stewards. Then smart green infrastructure, if any, has to pass if there is no avoidance or alternative linear infrastructural remedial measure, then of course mitigation has to be done. And it's very difficult for species like the clouded leopard, again, which I said have very, very specific niche requirements. So the planning process, when a linear infrastructure project comes into such pristine habitats, it is important that the ecologists, the forestry services, and the other departments have consultations and see the best way forward. NHAI in India is doing a tremendous job to really have wildlife friendly mitigations across the infrastructure. And it's important that niche requirements for species like the clouded leopards are also taken into account. Then, of course, I talked about innovative financing, whether it is trust funds, participatory kitties, bonds. There are so many models available. It's time that we work collectively for conserving a species like it could be any wildcat species, not only clouded leopard. We have fishing cats as an indicator of the Tarai habitat, the wetlands of Tarai. We have clouded leopards as an indicator of tropical rainforests and the eastern Himalayas. We have caracal as a typical indicator of the natural scrubs, which are somehow discarded as wasteland. So it's very, very important that the indicator value of this species is well planned and well communicated when any of these strategies are taken into account. And all these strategies have to work together. It's not that, okay, we can only do species conservation and leave out people's agenda. We need to focus on the inclusive people's agenda simultaneously as we are doing the species and habitat conservation with all the possible models and much, much more. There have been so many efforts, and I congratulate every person who has taken a small or big effort towards conservation of this really, really magnificent and unfortunately a species which is decreasing too soon. So thank you, everyone. And this is what we are conserving. This is a photograph from Pake Tiger Reserve in Arunachal Pradesh, which is also home to the clouded leopards. So these pristine forests, this pristine water is what we need to conserve for not only protecting the clouded leopards, but also for securing our own future. Thank you very much.
Right. So that was the overview of the global status and the broad overview of the conservation strategies that can be employed for the conservation of small wildcats. So moving forward, we now move on to the next talk for today, which is on the in situ, on the natural history of the clouded leopard. So we have today with us Ms. Priya Singh, who is an independent researcher working on the current and historical aspects of mammalian communities, including their distribution with special focus on the Northeast and Western India. She is an active citizen science data contributor and a user in her leisure. In her leisure time, she likes to watch and document moths. And she will speak to us today more on the natural history of the clouded leopard with her talk on the tiger in the canopy, the clouded leopard. So over to you.
Hi, Arundhati. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm actually delighted and honored to be talking about this beautiful cat. And I'd like to thank everyone here for calling me here to speak about clouded leopards today. Now, you may wonder why I call it the tiger in the canopy. And the answer to that question lies in the anatomy of clouded leopards. Clouded leopards have these very well-padded, wide paws. They have a long, thick tail, a stout body, and a very flexible ankle, which allows them to move freely in the forest canopy. This also allows them to exploit prey, which is generally found up in the higher parts of trees. And given that these species are generally found in forested habitats, this ability comes in use very well. And so if you look at this cat's dentition, you'll realize that it has these very long canines. Now, that picture of a skull is from somewhere in Arunachal Pradesh. And if you see the canines are at least about 4 centimeters long here, that is in proportion to the skull size of a clouded leopard or skull size of any cat. This is the longest length of canines for any cat in the world. And hence these cats are often compared to saber-toothed cats, which, as you may know, are extinct now. But what comes in aid to clouded leopards because of their long canines is that they are able to predate upon species that you would otherwise think impossible for a cat this size to predate upon. A recent study from Laos states that they found clouded leopards were predating primarily on wild pigs, followed by hog badgers, followed by rodents, and followed by serow. Now, one would think that impossible for a cat this size. But clouded leopards also predate on primates up in tree canopy, on birds, on squirrels, and they may also predate upon livestock. So I would say in Mizoram, in Mizo language, the word that is used for clouded leopards perhaps defines them better than any other word used for clouded leopards. So in Mizo language, clouded leopards are called either Zongral or Kelral. Kelral literally translates to the tiger that eats goats, and Zongral translates to the tiger that eats monkeys, referring to the behavior of this species. These are cats that are primarily found in forested landscapes, to the extent that a study in 2019 done by David McDonald's team found that putting together data from across the clouded leopards range, they found that the most efficient determinant of clouded leopard distribution across their range was canopy cover. And when canopy cover was reduced from 100% to 65%, 25% detections of clouded leopards dropped. So we are talking about a cat that is found in tropical forests. It is adapted very well to these forests. It may be arboreal, it may be terrestrial. It's equally efficient in both habitats. And This cat also has a very important cultural relationship and significance in parts of Northeastern India. I don't know about other parts of the world, but Northeast India is a landscape that I'm familiar with and can speak for. So if you see the picture to the right, that picture is of Mophlang Sacred Grove. Some of you may have seen this place or visited this place. This is in Khasi Hills, and it's a place which is sacred to the people living around this region. And they visit this place to perform certain rituals. So when villagers have certain questions to ask, and they go to their local deity at these ritual sites, and they seek the blessings, or they seek consent, or indications from Labasa, which is their local god, to know whether they should go ahead with a certain activity or not. And apparently, they are given visions. And if the vision is of a clouded leopard, it indicates an affirmative response. Whereas if the indication is in terms of a snake, it denotes impending danger. The clouded leopard is basically, I think Monish has already covered this, but I'm just quickly going to go through this. So we have two species of clouded leopards, the Neophilus nebulosa and the Neophilus diardi. Nebulosa is what we also call the mainland clouded leopard, or the Indo-Chinese clouded leopard. This is what is found in India, which is only in northeastern part of India and parts of Southeast Asia. Diardi is the Sunda clouded leopard, which is found in Sumatra and Borneo, and we do not see its distribution in this map, and we are not going to be talking about it here. This is a very recent map, and if you look at the amount of red here, the red denotes the retreat of the clouded leopard from these areas. And if you see the yellow, it suggests places where the species is found still. Now, if you look closely at this map, you will be able to immediately notice that Northeast India is where the species is found and is perhaps the key to the future of conservation of the clouded leopard. My journey with the clouded leopard began in Nagaland, where I first saw this pelt of a freshly killed clouded leopard. We were doing a survey along the Indo-Myanmar border, and a gentleman in the village suggested that we go. He directed us to the skin because he was equally curious to know what this animal was. So we went and saw it, and it turned out to be a clouded leopard. Nobody in the village knew what this animal was. They'd shot it, but they had no idea what it was. Thereafter, I continued working in Northeast India, and each study site led to little droplets of information about clouded leopards. Until in 2014, I got a chance to do a standalone project on the clouded leopard. The reason I emphasize on the word standalone is because this work did not involve collecting byproduct data from some other exercise or some other study. This was a study focused on the clouded leopard, for which I did reconnaissance surveys in two locations. So one was Pakke Tiger Reserve and the other was Dampa. And I chose Dampa as my study site for this work. The reason I chose Dampa, there were many reasons for choosing Dampa, but what stood out really was this very informative article on Dampa from the then field director of Dampa called Puthalana Zathang, who also happens to be a good friend and who guided me through the park and showed me what Dampa was all about. The other factors that stood in favor of Dampa were that Dampa was terra incognita. We knew very little about Dampa, and I wanted to work in a place which we didn't have data from then. So, and other than that, of course, it's a landscape that I fell in love with the moment I looked at it. For those of you here not familiar with Dampa, Dampa Tiger Reserve is located in Mizoram, and it is at the tri-junction of Mizoram, Tripura, and Bangladesh. This park covers 1,000 square kilometer area with 500 square kilometers of the buffer and 500 of the core area. And the elevational gradient in Dampa goes from 50 meters to 1,100 meters. The peak that you see in this photograph is Chorpial Talang. That's at 1,100 meters and the highest point in Dampa. The vegetation here is mostly bamboo, but there are patches of semi-evergreen, evergreen, and moist deciduous forest. And on the peripheries of Dampa, which is within the buffer area, there are several villages, and these villages have people from Mizo, Chakma, and Bru communities. Also to note here, Dampa has no road network. So if you want to work in this landscape, you have to be walking with all your luggage on your back and sleep wherever you get a place, because there are not even too many anti-poaching camps inside. I used a standard method, which is used across the country, and hence I'm not going to talk too much about it. We used camera traps to photograph clouded leopards, but this was preceded by an intensive reconnaissance survey because I had to first learn about the species before I went out putting camera traps for them. So I did an intensive reconnaissance survey where I marked every scrape mark, looked for clouded leopard signs, identified every potential place where the cat could be moving into or you could be using. And at the end of it, I covered an area of about 100 square kilometers for the camera placement. And this area was decided primarily by safety being the most important determinant, because we wanted to make sure the team was safe. Dampas had issues in the past and we didn't want to endanger any of the team members. It also was dependent on, at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we had adequate data to do a statistical analysis at the end of this study and to generate density estimates of clouded leopards and know more about their community ecology and their relationships with other cats. So as you can see, sometimes you have very obliging clouded leopards, like this particular individual, CL102, who graced me with his presence multiple times and obviously also added to the data that we generated. We had 80 pairs of camera traps, out of which we lost 6 pairs even before we could get any data from them. From the remaining 74 pairs of camera traps, we got over 160 camera trap photos of clouded leopards, which basically translated into 84 independent events. Some of you here may be familiar with the definition of independence when we are talking about camera trapping. And if you're not, I would suggest you read the paper cited below. And this translated into 10 individuals. So out of 74 camera trap locations that we had, we got clouded leopard captures at 23 locations, which in my opinion is a very good statistic. We used a spatially explicit capture-recapture method, which is what is commonly used to estimate cat numbers across India, and generated a density estimate of about 5 individuals per 100 square kilometers. Now, for those familiar with tiger densities and leopard densities, this may seem like a very low estimate. But for those familiar with clouded leopards, this is actually one of the highest estimates for clouded leopards anywhere in the world. I won't say that that's the highest estimate as such, because there is a variance associated with it, but it is a very high estimate. We also got a sneak peek into the lives of several other cats that share their habitats with clouded leopards. And this assemblage of these 4 species of cats, that's clouded leopard, marble cat, leopard cat, and golden cat. It's a very well-known assemblage of forest cats in Southeast Asia. So in Southeast Asian forests, you're supposed to have these 4 cats living together, coexisting. And so we were also curious to know how these cats partition themselves out, especially the similar-sized marble cat and leopard cat, and the similar-sized clouded leopard and golden cat. And so we had established a hypothesis at the beginning of our study that similar-sized cats would either be temporally partitioning themselves, which is they may be separating themselves out in terms of time, or in terms of space. And what we found was that the marble cat and leopard cat went exactly as per our prediction. The leopard cat was entirely nocturnal, the marble cat was entirely diurnal. So basically the marble cat was moving during the day and the leopard cat at night, and that's how they were partitioning themselves. But the clouded leopard, on the other hand, we found was actually did not have any specific activity patterns. This animal was active. It had an activity peak at dusk, one at dawn, and it was also active in parts at night and during the day. And we saw that its activity pattern with golden cat did not really fit in, which was a surprise. However, we did get data which suggested that the two were separating themselves out spatially. However, given that the data was not robust, it was never published, and I'm not sharing the results here. But having looked at or having spoken briefly about the ecology of the species, my experience with clouded leopards and what we studied about clouded leopards, which is basically looking at their numbers and their activities. Now, the question is, what are the lessons that I have learned with respect to clouded leopards, and what do I think is the way ahead for conservation of the species? So I would say some of the very evident aspects of clouded leopards in India are that it is, without doubt, the top cat of tropical forests. I would call it the mascot of tropical forests. I agree, Manish says it should be treated as a mascot of livelihood. Well, it should be, but it is the mascot of tropical forests for certain. This is a cat that I'm still unsure of how it associates itself with its co-predators. I believe I got lucky in Dampa, where for lack of other larger predators, clouded leopards were very terrestrial, and hence we got them on camera traps. I am uncertain of what would happen in a landscape where there are other larger predators available. Would that mean that clouded leopards become more arboreal? Or would that mean that clouded leopards would leave that habitat altogether? So when we talk about reintroduction of larger predators into these landscapes, we must give a thought to the historical past of those landscapes and see first if those predators were actually found in large numbers ever in those habitats. We need to develop monitoring techniques better, and this would involve a lot of people and stakeholders coming in together because monitoring techniques require, as of now, we are using camera traps, which are used across the country, across different kinds of habitats in India. However, the northeastern part of India receives very heavy rainfall. In fact, the heaviest rainfall in the world is received in some of those locations. It rains for many months of the year. The terrain is undulating and highly undulating, and these regions have very dense canopy covers. So we need to find efficient monitoring mechanisms. At the same time, we need to develop techniques to analyze this data in different ways than what we are using right now. Because as of now, the kind of methods we use to analyze data require large amounts of data. But that may not be possible for species like clouded leopards, especially if we want to monitor them across landscapes which may not be protected or which may have large amount of hunting. I believe the clouded leopard is still the unknown cat. I agree, Manish says it's been seen, it appears in postal stamps, in paintings. Yes, it is a beautiful cat. However, I still believe it's the unknown cat. And as evidence for this, I would go back to the story from Nagaland, where it was hunted, but nobody knew what this cat was. We have similar stories coming from many parts of Northeast India where people see the cat or they hunt it and they don't know what it is. There are places in Arunachal where I have shown pictures of this cat to people and they don't know if they have a name for it. Having said all of this, I would say that clouded leopards in Northeast India are found across a diversity of landscapes and habitat types, but their refuges are still protected areas. And in the future, these protected areas are going to be even more important for clouded leopard persistence. And however, these protected areas lack attention in terms of attention to forest personnel. Forest staff is not paid on time. These protected areas are understaffed. There are vacancies that haven't been filled up for years. Senior forest management is missing from them. And at the same time, the boundaries of some of these protected areas are not even defined. So I believe that attention needs to be paid to these areas if we want to conserve the clouded leopard. Now, talking about the threats that the clouded leopard faces and connecting it with why we need to support staff on the ground who are protecting these areas here are some of the threats that clouded leopards face. So that picture to the left is from very recent years. It's from 2019 from Manipur. These look like sub-adult clouded leopards. They were shot and people in the village didn't even really know what these animals were. It's not just direct persecution, which could be retaliatory in nature, or it could just be persecution. I mean, it could just be hunting. It's also hunting of prey species. But these are smaller threats in comparison to the larger threats that we are talking about. Just a few days ago, our at a national level, we have given clearance to an amendment to the Forest Conservation Act. So basically, we have passed the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill. Now, what does that mean to landscapes which have clouded leopards in Northeast India? When we exempt areas which are within a radius of 100 kilometers from international boundaries from any forest conservation laws, we are talking about most of clouded leopard habitat disappearing or changing or being brought under no kind of regulation. And connect this to the map that I showed earlier from the IUCN. Northeast India really holds the key to the future of clouded leopards across their range in Asia. It's not just that. We have governments of Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram simultaneously talking about expanding areas under oil palm plantation. We have large-scale exploration for minerals and oil happening in these landscapes. There's political instability in these landscapes, and we are talking about cultural prevalence of hunting here. So when you put all these threats together, it is even more important to think of ways to find refuges for clouded leopards and also bring in other stakeholders like community participation, figuring out alternate and innovative ways to conserve these species, because we cannot use the same models we have been using in mainland India for conservation of clouded leopards. This needs innovation, and this needs some thinking. So, well, again, going back to referring to Monish's presentation, I do see that he has several points in place and some thought given to this. And I do hope that is going to be implemented and it is going to bring about the change that is required to protect these species. Because as of now, I'm really afraid for the future of the clouded leopard. Having said all of this, I would like to acknowledge several organizations and people who have been with me through my journey of collecting these little droplets of information on clouded leopards and having some kind of an idea of where the species is going currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya, for the overview of the threats that the species faces. We will take question answers for this session once the final talk for today is over. So joining us for the last talk for today is Mr. Lakshmi Narasimha Ranganathan, who is the scientific officer at the Central Zoo Authority. So Mr. Narasimha is a zoologist by training and has worked in the field of ex situ conservation and research for over a decade. He has been closely associated with developing management protocols for select pheasant species in the state of Himachal Pradesh and has also been instrumental in standardizing protocols for the ex situ conservation breeding and reintroduction of the state bird of Himachal Pradesh, which is the western tragopan. From his experience in the field of ex situ conservation, his talk today discusses the evolving role of off-site conservation strategies for the clouded leopard. So over to you, Narasimha.
Thanks, Arundhati. I'm just going to share my screen. All okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Again, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm actually quite delighted to have this chance to talk about clouded leopard on International Clouded Leopard Day. I was just wondering, looking at the sequence of the talks today, and given the fact that the talk on ex situ conservation is towards the end, is actually an indicator that for a species, spectacular species like clouded leopard, as we just saw from the previous talks, ex situ conservation is probably the last resort. We would want to see the species in the wild, in its beautiful habitat. Nevertheless, ex situ conservation has its values, and it has been crucial in saving several species. So I would like to just kind of give an overview of what are the potentials in terms of applying ex situ conservation measures for saving the clouded leopard. So I wouldn't go much into the details about the ecology and the biology of the species, because that has been excellently covered by the previous two speakers. Proceeding straight into ex situ conservation as such, just a bit of orientation into this talk, because we are coming right from the forests of northeastern India into an enclosure. So ex situ conservation, basically it is off-site conservation. So basically what you do is there are certain species that are severely threatened in the wild, which would need support. So ex situ conservation is kind of a method wherein you remove species from their natural habitat, which is why it is called as offsite conservation, and then they are put under human care, and then you manage the species. As you can imagine, because we are managing the species in captivity or under human care, so you have added advantage on how you can really shape the population of the species, how you breed the species in captivity, and so on and so forth. So it gives you some advantages. Some of them being, like for example, one of the key things is that because you are managing a species in captivity very closely, you have a very good control on how well you can preserve the genetic diversity, how do you prevent inbreeding, because you trace pedigrees, you know how the species is performing in captivity, and so on and so forth. So preservation of genetic diversity is something that you have a little bit control on. And generally, it is an assumption that when you opt for an ex situ conservation measure, it is supposed to be, you are supposed to develop a population that is an insurance population. That's kind of a representative of the wild conspecifics. It's not just some captive, it's not just one group of captive bred individuals, but they are supposed to be a subset of what you would see in the wild. So that is how close they are supposed to be to the wild population. So that's so they also support population reinforcement. That's what I mean to cover there. Like we actually noticed in the previous two talks, species like clouded leopard, so enigmatic, elusive, shy species. We know so little about the habitat because of various reasons. Maybe the species itself is shy, or the habitat is so tough that you cannot really study them in a detailed way. So when you keep species in captivity in an optimal way, okay, so you get to understand more about the species biology. And it has been proven through various studies that they are really good representatives of wild conspecifics if you have a good captive population. So it provides insights on the biology of the species which are possibly or otherwise very difficult to achieve in the wild. And of course, for someone who rarely visits the northeastern forests to see the clouded leopard, seeing them in a zoo or in a well-kept enclosure is something that will have a long-lasting impact on how that species is perceived and what is the importance of the species and so on. So just to give a broad, conceptual inclination of what ex situ conservation means. Now, as far as ex situ conservation in India is concerned, so the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has constituted a central body. It's a statutory body, that is the Central Zoo Authority, which is where I work, which looks at ex situ conservation in India. What are the species and so on and so forth. So just a brief about the organization as such. It was constituted in 1992, and then the functions of the authority are defined in the Wildlife Protection Act. It's headquartered in Delhi. So basically, Central Zoo Authority is tasked with the functions assigned is to oversee technical and scientific management of zoos in the country. Now, there are over 150 zoos in the country, which include small zoos, large zoos, exclusive rescue centers, which are off display. There are conservation breeding centers, which focus on exclusive species that are endangered and so on and so forth. And roughly, there are more than 600 species that are housed in Indian zoos. Millions of visitors, they come to Indian zoos, so they have a very huge impact as far as reaching out to the public about the positive roles of conservation and the importance of species is concerned. Now, before we actually get into the clouded leopard situation in zoos, just a broad overview of what about Felidae in zoos. So all species under the family Felidae. So basically, there are around 22 species and over 5,000 individuals, and in 1,600 zoos across the world. This is the status of the species that are in the family Felidae, around 40 odd species probably, and then of which around 22 are represented in zoos. And then And the second thing is, if you look at what is in the situation in the Indian context, in the last 2 decades, there are around 18 species of felids housed, annual average of around 1,400 individuals, and in more than 140 recognized zoos. So quite fairly common cats, very fairly kept in zoos. If we look at the history of clouded leopard as such in captivity, it's a species like not very common in captive collections, but it has been housed like since the early 20th century. But it was since the late 20th century since when a lot of zoos have taken interest in initiating captive breeding programs for the species, and it is quite challenging. If you don't know the biology of the species, it's very difficult to breed them in captivity, and keep them in captivity has been really tough. So for the species also, because of the limited know-how, it's quite challenging. It was quite challenging. But as and when more individuals were kept and bred, and they were studied, so there was a better understanding about the species and what are the needs in captivity and so on and so forth. So with all these coordinated efforts, there have been quite a bit of regional breeding programs for the species. For example, the species survival plans that are run by the Association of Zoos and Aquaria in the US. So in the 80s and 90s, there are quite a bit of programs ongoing for this particular species. And of course, because of the fact that these programs shouldn't run in isolation, there's a lot of collaboration. Say, for example, a zoo in US or Europe coordinating with a zoo in the range country of the species for to support in situ conservation and so on and so forth. So there's quite a bit of collaboration that has happened. And despite all this, it's a species that really is it is still like Priya said, it's a poorly known species, so it's very difficult to be kept in captivity. As far as the status in zoos zoo is concerned, like I said, they have been part of zoological collections since the early 20th century. Globally, there are more than 360 individuals in over 110 zoos. That's the current status of clouded leopard in captivity. In the Indian context, again, there are 11 individuals in 3 recognized Indian zoos. So that's the distribution of clouded leopards in captivity. So now looking at the current context, so there are several programs ongoing for this particular species, which are actively involved in breeding them and trying to establish insurance populations of the species. A very solid collaboration between these programs, although it's being attempted, but it's fairly, it's being worked out still. So there are conservation programs for the species, especially the ones in the ex situ context, I mean. So it is something that is still being worked on. But nevertheless, there are numerous studies that have really contributed to understand the biology of the species. A lot of research in terms of especially reproductive parameters of this particular species. There have been a lot of advancements by studying captive individuals, which would have been really impossible to study in the wild. So understanding of the biology of the species has really improved after having kept the species in captivity. And of course, see, like I said, seeing the species and getting a chance to look at the species has a long-lasting impact on how you perceive it and what is the conservation importance that you assign to the species. So, and despite all of this, it's quite challenging to establish a sort of, like I said, an insurance population as such, which will really support in situ conservation, in the sense that a solid ex situ population that would really sort of support in situ conservation in terms of release of individuals and all. That's probably still a long way to go. I just want to highlight, like I said, there has been quite a bit of research on the species. So in global context, just a few case studies that I wanted to highlight. Say, for example, Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium in United States of America. So they have they have a top-notch breeding program for this particular species. They have really cracked the breeding of the species in in captivity and ensuring that there is a sustainable population of the species set up in captivity. And then National Zoo in the USA, they are collaborating with the Smithsonian, and they have really come up with outstanding data as far as the reproductive physiology of the species is concerned. This kind of proximate research, like on the proximate aspects of behavior, proximate aspects of physiology, it's very tough to conduct such studies in the wild. But captive individuals, having access to captive individuals gives you that chance to really understand the species. And then also there's a zoo in Thailand. They are working in collaboration with some zoos in the West, which are really, it's a long distance collaboration in terms of establishing a captive population that can possibly support species restoration in future, sometime in future. As far as the Indian context is concerned, of course, like I said, it's a very small population that is being held in zoos. Central Zoo Authority, like I mentioned earlier, it is the agency that identifies species that that require ex situ conservation in the country. So they have been, Central Zoo Authority has been assigned that particular function, and this particular species, the clouded leopard, has been identified as a priority species for conservation breeding, planned conservation breeding in the country. Sifai Jala Zoological Park is a coordinating zoo, so they are tasked with the job of establishing a captive population. And then there is Assam State Zoo, which is supposed to support Sifai Jala once they establish a population of the species in captivity. The coordinating zoo, that is Sifai Jala, has around 9 individuals, and then the oldest record as far as the Indian population is concerned, it dates back to 1984. That's the oldest record. We have a stud book, national stud book for the species that tracks the pedigree and the ancestry of all the individuals. As on date, there have been 35 birds that have been recorded in captivity till date. Now, looking ahead, as far as what is the potential of ex situ conservation for this particular species is concerned, like I said, they have a very complex behavior. There's mate aggression. There is a very low survival rate of the litter. So breeding them is quite challenging. And coupled with that is the fact that they need to have a specific diet that is matched so that there aren't ancillary physiological issues that don't develop. So breeding them itself is challenging. And also, especially when you keep felids in captivity, space becomes a very major constraint, because you have to optimize what you can actually build in terms of an enclosure in comparison with what they have as home ranges in the wild, which is quite a bit of a challenge in itself, because it's impossible to match the enclosure size with that of the home range. So spatial limitations and cost, that is something which again is a constraint. And finally, like I said, genetic diversity. The thing is, you don't have the luxury of starting a captive population with hundreds of individuals. So it's a very few individuals that have started that have served as founders for the captive stock. For example, the Indian population, there are around 5 founders, which is quite low. And the possibility of acquiring a high number of founders, like for example around 30, say for example theoretically close number to a basic number of founders required for a captive stock. So it's very difficult to get that number of founders. And also, these are some of the major pitfalls, or rather than pitfall, it's kind of it's very tough to match or fulfill these requirements. So that remains a major challenge. But nevertheless, like I said, there are several zoological facilities that have really worked on the species, and they have contributed really well in terms of what we know about the husbandry of the species. There is a detailed husbandry guidelines for the species that has been published, especially with Smithsonian National Zoo taking the lead, which sort of details on what is the optimal enclosure size required for the species, what would be the reproductive management that is required for this particular species, the dietary guidelines and all. But nevertheless, it is adaptive. we don't know in a very comprehensive way what is it that these species need. That it's basically we learn as we go. So again, that's something that that needs to be looked at. Looking ahead, well, I wouldn't say that ex situ conservation doesn't have any potential for conservation of the species. There are breeding programs that have really performed well. Like I said, like I mentioned in my talk, there are some programs that have really managed to create a sustainable captive stock, which is genetically genetic diversity of which is quite optimal. So that is something that really needs to be advanced. And of course, because of the fact that this species is so difficult to manage in captivity and breed them in captivity, and given the limited lifespan of this captivity, you cannot keep experimenting and waiting. So there might be a need for adoption of improved genetic techniques like cryopreservation and stuff to sort of safeguard the genetic diversity of the species, and also in understanding what is the genetic status of the entire global population. Okay, it's just that, like I said, there are 300 odd individuals that are in captivity, but they are spread across 110 institutions. So we need to understand as a sort of a if you look at it all as one particular population of the species, so what is it like? So that needs to be really looked at. And of course, it goes without saying that the species they really have a very really important impact. Is zoos getting visitors that really serves to sort of change the perspective of the younger generation towards how towards highlighting the fact that these species require conservation interventions. And of course, especially in the Indian context, it's more relevant to collaborate with zoos that have had a successful history with the species, so that there is knowledge transfer as far as managing the species and breeding them in captivity is concerned. With that, well, there's not much as far as the ex situ conservation as such for the species is concerned, but I have tried to sort of cover what ex situ conservation as a method, as a conservation method, what is the potential it has for the conservation of the species. But I like I started my talk, I really hope that we really don't have to resort to ex situ conservation for species like clouded leopard. They really need to be in the wild, and they have to be preserved in the wild. I would be happy to answer if there are any questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Narasimha, for the talk on the ex situ conservation perspective and the challenges that are faced therein for safeguarding the population of clouded leopards. We'll just take a few quick questions before we wrap up the session. So first, we'll go with the questions for Priya. Priya, are you there?
Yeah.
Hi. So the first question for you is that how effective was the camera trapping method used for population estimation, and was there any challenge faced when you deployed the camera traps and extrapolated data?
So as far as the camera trapping method was concerned, we were successful with it because we got a lot of data. And so, like I mentioned that, we got lucky in Dampa because perhaps the clouded leopards were more terrestrial there, and hence we could capture them on camera traps. So that was not an issue. We were able to generate density estimates for clouded leopards with confidence and publish them, and for marble cats as well. Whether there were challenges while camera trapping, if you go back to my presentation, one of the pictures there is of a kidnapping happening and being camera trapped. So that's the kind of environment we were working in. So yes, it wasn't the most safe, secure environment to be working in, but I suppose that's the kind of landscapes clouded leopards are found in. And political instability is one of the big challenges to conservation in Northeast India.
Right. Moving forward, the next question for you is that what are the methods used for individual identification for clouded leopard?
Well, we use the same methods as we use for tigers. Luckily, we don't get those many camera trap pictures of clouded leopards, so we don't need to use an automated software to identify them. And here we can actually identify them using just photographs and individually comparing photographs. So we look for patterns on their flanks. So if you see, they have unique, each clouded leopard has unique patterns. And we place 2 camera traps at each location. So we basically get both flanks of the clouded leopard, and then we compare them. So each individual is basically, we have both flanks of each individual, and then we compare these pictures with those obtained of other individuals. And based on that, we see which ones are the same and which ones are different. And with clouded leopards, because of the huge, the reason they are called Neophelis nebulosa, the nebulosa, the big clouded patterns on their bodies, they are so distinct and they're so different between individuals. And apart from that, they have so many other markings. It's actually quite easy to differentiate between individuals.
Right. And the last question for you is that, is there a way to reduce persecution of the species? And have there been any effective community awareness activities that have, reduced this over the years? Or you can comment on that.
Well, so clouded leopards, I don't think actively people are looking to hunt clouded leopards. At least that's how I'd like to perceive it. And I hope that's the case. But there's perhaps a lot of accidental catching of clouded leopards. So either they get snared, because if you walk in some of these forests in Northeast India, you will come across, in certain landscapes, you will come across a snare every 100 meters. And these snares are put for, whatever species that can get caught. And accidentally, you may have clouded leopards getting caught in those. So I think the hunting of clouded leopards is perhaps more big as an accident. But then there are also cases where people, like the case in Nagaland, where this person was walking to his field. It was not even hunting season. It was a community imposed non-hunting season, but he had his gun with him. He saw this animal, which he had never seen before. He shot it. He said he didn't go out actively hunting, the animal was there, he shot it. So it's also like, it requires some understanding of the communities, of, their ways of going about these things. And unless we can actually, engage with these people on the ground, it will be hard to kind of stop this hunting immediately. So I would say, and of course, there is evidence of clouded leopards now coming into trafficking and trade, and their pelts being trafficked out of, across Southeast Asia and Myanmar. I think there was one seizure with 95 skins. So of course, with the larger predators gone, there is focus on clouded leopards as well. But I think they're just so hard to find that there's not targeted hunting of clouded leopards yet. But if they come across them, they will hunt them. And yes, sorry, to just complete that, I don't think there's any targeted intervention to prevent this hunting yet. There's just general, discussions with communities and, general appeals saying do not hunt.
Right. So there are no concerted conservation, community awareness activities to kind of put a stop.
Not targeted specifically at the clouded leopard. I would say, there are people making a lot of effort to engage with communities and, ask them not to hunt or not hunt in certain seasons. And, there is a lot of engagement going on across Northeast India, but I think it's still going to take time. I think enforcement needs to happen simultaneously. It cannot just be awareness. There has to be some kind of action taken against people who are defaulting.
Okay. And there's just one last, I think a morphometric question, that would you happen to know the pug mark size of the clouded leopard?
So if you see in my presentation, there's a picture of a track with a pen kept next to it. I'm really bad with measurements, so I'm not going to just throw a figure. I will probably just pass that question to Narasimha, because he's probably better with figures of clouded leopards and he sees them more often in captivity. So he probably has exact dimensions. So yes, sorry, forgive me for not giving a number. I don't want to give you an incorrect figure.
No problem at all. So those were the questions for you, Priya.
Actually, I
think
have a
we'll
question to Priya.
sure go ahead.
Priya, what happens when you encounter a clouded leopard in the forest, in the wild?
I'm yet to see one in the
They just run
forest.
away or what?
Well, I think the clouded leopard will run away. I'm sure many clouded leopards have seen me, but I haven't seen one. My camera traps have seen many of them. And, sometimes we are slaves to our professions. So I prefer my cameras getting pictures of clouded leopards than me seeing one, because to me, data becomes more important because I have to justify it to my funding agencies and my employers. So,
Nothing like
yeah,
they are aggressive to humans or anything, no?
I don't think so. I mean, they're such amazing cats. I really doubt if they are aggressive to anyone. They're just trying to save their lives.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right. So now moving on, we'll go to the questions that are there for you, Nasuma. So the first question for you is that how difficult is it to standardize husbandry protocols for felids in captivity?
It is certainly species specific. For example, there are certain species of cats that have really fared well in captivity. For example, if you take the Bengal tiger, they have really bred well and they really adapt well to captivity. But on the other hand, there are species like the clouded leopard, rusty spotted cat, for instance, very tough species. I think it is directly correlated with the ecology of the species. In fact, I would draw a parallel with the Western Dagupan, the species I work with. So, very shy, elusive species that live in the, dense forests. Very shy species, they're generally very tough in captivity and they don't adapt very well. And especially with felids, you have, the entire breeding physiology of the species needs to be really understood in order to account for the social systems of the species. There are just too many parameters. And then there are certain species that just don't adapt well to captivity at all. You will manage to breed them, but it will always remain sort of suboptimal. And felids as a taxa, it's quite diverse. There are some species, like I said, they adapt really well. We know very good about their husbandry. But on the other side of the spectrum are species like, I would definitely like to cite clouded leopard and rusty spotted cat. Because we don't know much about them, so we don't know how to match the requirements in captivity. It's as simple as that.
Right. So in line with what you've said is the next question. I think you've already listed out a few attributes, but what are the key attributes that should be looked at, which when we talk about conservation breeding of a felid, especially with reference to clouded leopard? I think it'll be a slight repetition, but you can just, if there's anything you'd like to add on to it that you've already mentioned.
Just 4 pointers broadly. Conservation breeding, just to sort of take the, if the person who has asked this question is interested, there are 4 broad parameters that we look at. One is the demography, how well the population is sustainable, what is the growth rate of a particular population, whether it's going to sustain in the long run. The second thing is the genetic aspect of the population, how well is the inbreeding managed and how are the pedigrees managed. Third thing is the behavioral competence of individuals. You should not end up breeding a stock of individuals that don't resemble anywhere close to wild conspecific. So that's again a big no-no. And lastly, diseases have to be well managed and understood. Diseases, it doesn't necessarily mean that like big diseases, but inappropriate diet, nutritional issues, all of this have to be really understood. So these are the 4 broad facets that one needs to concentrate on as far as the as far as taking up conservation breeding is concerned.
Right. Thank you. And the last question for you is that you mentioned the cost of maintaining clouded leopards in captivity is high. Why is that so? And is there something that can be done to reduce it?
Well, the cost is mainly, like I said, if you want to keep a species like a clouded leopard in captivity, you need to have you need money to build enclosures. The larger the enclosures, the better it is for the species. So you need more money for that. So that's where majority of the cost comes from. And of course, not to mention the fact that you really need to have the peripheral infrastructure required to manage a species like that in captivity is very high. So you just cannot, in the middle of nowhere, it's not about just building an enclosure and keeping the species, but it has to be, there are several needs of the species that has to be met when the species is brought under human care. Majority is the infrastructure that is, keeping individuals separate, sexes separate, once they breed, managing the young litter. So you need infrastructure for all of this. So that's quite intensive as such. Keeping a bird itself with the tragopan used to spend so much, and it's quite resource intensive. So unless and until you have a proper plan and a way forward, and with a well set objective, it's not something you don't you do without much planning. And morphometry, I'm pretty sure the data is there, but I don't remember. I mean, I can give that, but I'll need some time to pull it out. I'm pretty sure people have measured it. I mean, that's there. People have measured hormone levels. They would have definitely measured the pug mark, but I don't recall it. I'm sorry.
No problem. We'll put it up as a separate segment on the morphometrics of clouded leopard. So with that, we've come to the closure of the webinar for International Clouded Leopard Day. On behalf of the Global Tiger Forum, I would like to thank all our speakers, to the in-house speakers, Dr. Rajesh Sir, Monish, Priya, Narsima, for taking time out of your busy schedules and joining us for this talk. I would also like to thank the audience for being so patient and listening more on the species in situ and ex situ inclusive. And I hope that you know more about the species that we are trying to safeguard under this GEF7 project, and how we can build in the species recovery protocols and so forward move to having a more robust conservation strategy for the small wildcats, which are usually understudied. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone once again for being with us throughout, and a very happy International Clouded Leopard Day. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Enjoyed
you.
this.